Hey everybody, so I wanted to hop on here real quick because I see it's kind of going a buzz in different places um, about Jay-Z supporting, helping to fund, and actively endorsing this Pennsylvania school voucher program to funnel $300 million into private schools instead of public ones. Okay? Now, Jay Z, let's be clear, is from New York. He's not even from Pennsylvania. I'm not either, but I'm just making a point when he's involved in state politics. And be rest assured, education is very political. Okay? So I'm going to tell you as a person, okay, who is educated, who is a black woman, who did go to public school her whole life, K through 12, went to college and went to graduate school. I had no idea what the independent school world was like. Independent schools, what they call the schools now instead of private, but nevertheless, they're the same thing. Now, I had no idea the world I was going into when I graduated from UCLA with my PhD. I was going to try to get a job because professorships are really hard to obtain. So I applied for some of those, but not seriously. I just wanted consistent work. That's what I wanted. I'm not going to lie. And I was prepared and tried to, in my last year, I wanted to apply to Georgia Public Schools so I could move back to Atlanta and be close to my family. Right? I have a PhD in history. History, one of the core subjects. They tell me that's not good enough, that I have to go through the state testing or whatever, which was fine. Like, I didn't mind taking a test and studying for I forget the name of the test. But it was like, oh yeah, then you need to be the assistant to somebody for a year. And I'm like, what the fuck? I've been teaching college students. The only kind of teaching I could get into, and I don't mean to say only, but I'm making a point because that wasn't my goal. I didn't know anything about the independent school world, and a grad friend of mine had told me, and that's how she was able to make, money, insurance, because she had had a baby and stuff like that. I was like, what the hell is an independent school? I didn't even know. I just thought they were called private schools. And I went on a bunch of interviews. I ended up getting this job in New York at a very elite private school. I don't even want to talk to you about the individual black teacher trauma. Nevertheless, I'm saying this because there was a whole world that existed I didn't know about. And I realized in working at independent schools, I remember saying to myself in that first, second, third year of teaching at a very elite private school, I said, this is who I was competing against. These kids don't have a clue. This is who I was up against. Not because I wasn't smart, not because people didn't see what I had done, what I had worked on, extracurriculars, my grades, my recommendations, which were excellent even going into college and graduate school. But because of this selective white perpetuating, and when I say white perpetuating, I mean continuous white supremacy, okay, and control is set up through these networks. Okay, so how private schools work. And I don't plan on being on here long, but I feel like somebody needs to know. Y'all who want to listen, fine. If you don't, that's fine too. I'm just telling you what it is. How private schools work, they are very selective. Okay, right? City of 8 million people, very selective. They are not, however, selective the way people think they may be. So I think people often think selectivity means it's merit based, right? Like your kid is really smart, your kid has a higher IQ, your kid scored really high on one of those elementary entries tests or middle school entry test or high school test, state test, something like that. And that's not true. It's not, especially for small kids. Do you know when they go into independent school, small kids who are entering like kindergarten and stuff, you know what the admissions officers do? They observe them in quote unquote play groups, see how they behave with other kids, right? Now, racially speaking, if the kids have already learned not to mess with you as a black child, you see that. But what are you going to do? Not let all of them in at the expense of some black kid? Because that's their thinking. No. Once again, that's the kind of encouragement, right? Now, how the hell do you call yourself sitting down and interviewing a 4 or 5-year-old? I mean, seriously, for entry into school. But I will say that admissions officer, and let me tell you something, money is the biggest part of admissions. I don't give a fuck what nobody tells you. That's what it is. By and large, if you can pay, you'll certainly at least last longer in the admissions process. If you are going to need financial aid, you still, yeah, you can come in and interview and they can observe you, but they're going to only consider you after they've established what kids that can pay are going to do. That's just what it is. These people send their kids to private schools in New York like it's nobody's business. That's the thing to do here. In a way that just wasn't the case where I grew up. Because a lot of people I work with all went to private schools. Even the people of color are just kind of like people on, that went. Like, I didn't know. So I went to public school, I went to college, I went to graduate school right after, and I completed my PhD in history by the time I was 27. Right? Now, you would think people would be impressed with that. But it's also kind of like inward. You can't really be that smart, so prove it to us. Okay? And I've been dealing with that. I'm 36 years old. I mean, I've been dealing with that my whole life, but it became especially offensive after all that work. I had parents who stayed in my ass about my education and exposed me to a lot with a little, who made me read, who took us to the library, bought us books, and by the grace of God, I got to where I am, and so did my siblings. Not everybody will have those opportunities. By the grace of God, and there's also, even within that, in terms of after doing everything you're supposed to do, luck. All right? So speaking of opportunities, okay? Jay-Z has essentially partnered with a white billionaire by the name of Jeff Yazz. It's Y-A-S-S, but that's what it looks like to me. To scam parents who want better for their children. I understand that parents want the best for their children and their children's education. I get it. I'm not even faulting them. Because the people who are controlling the media and the narrative about these private school vouchers are actively being misleading. So according to Education Week, because no, I don't get my information from blogs and shit like that. Quote, the legislation, they're talking about in Pennsylvania for the private schools, the legislation would establish a program using public funds, potentially up to $300 million this budget cycle, depending on what the legislature ultimately approves, for Pennsylvania students in low-achieving schools based on state testing metrics. Students in the eligible low-performing schools would have access to state subsidies to attend other schools, like private and religious schools. The proposal has been denounced by the state's largest teachers union, end quote. They are going to use the public tax dollars that the average citizen in Pennsylvania is paying to send your kid to private schools. And what you have to understand is that even with this bill in Pennsylvania, if it does pass, and there's other examples of this around the country, there is never a clause in this legislation that says these schools have to accept you. Because they don't. Private schools don't have that power unless public schools exist. And then that's supposed to mean, oh, they're terrible. Because that becomes one of those code words, especially after the 60s, that public education, urban, inner city, it means black kids that can't be taught because we really believe that black people are fundamentally dumb. And I worked in these schools to know that shit ain't fucking true. Any goddamn way. So the $300 million would still be appropriated to these private schools despite who they let in. So when white people get this money, because that's who's in charge of these fucking private schools, I don't give a shit if you go to that website and see a black person as head of the high school, middle school. Let me tell you something. That black person, more than likely, 99.99998% of the time, has already been whitewashed. They're glad to do it. They're glad to Tom. They're glad to Coon. That's why they promoted them, because they're safe. And that's just what it is. Will be appropriated to these private schools who have endowments like colleges. I remember sitting through these budget meetings as a teacher. I was like, wait, what the fuck? Where the hell do these people get these millions of dollars from? And as my sister would normally interrupt me when I talk about, where do white people get all this shit from? And she'll just go, slavery. And I was like, yeah, that was 2.5 centuries of free labor. Don't let anybody tell you that your history is something to be forgotten and to get the fuck over it. Fuck them. Okay? New York has a whole reparations office for Jewish people based on the Holocaust. with over hundreds of millions of dollars, over $100 million, just recently sent out reparations checks, and that stuff didn't even happen on this soil. Don't let nobody tell you that shit. Anyway, so these private schools, people who can already pay $50,000+ a year, in some cases $60,000 a year. If it's boarding school, it may be $70,000 to $80,000 a year. All right. All their students have tutors for all kinds of subjects, and many of them still aren't good at it. You want to know why? Because these people just get tutors. Okay, then they'll do better. Then they'll get the A, and they'll be able to go to an Ivy League. They act like college is the end all be all. And maybe for them, because their kids won't have to work. I mean, essentially, degrees are accessories. Meanwhile, they're essential to our survival, regular people. Their kids still aren't good at it because they don't teach their kids basic shit. Like what it is to have the discipline to sit your ass down at night and fucking study. And not blame the teacher. Now, we know that's a public and private school thing. But it is especially egregious when you spend all this money on tutors and you act like it's everybody. It's the teacher, it's the tutor. No, it's you and your parenting. Anyway, this billionaire white man, the richest man living in Pennsylvania, Jeff Yass, is essentially has partnered with Jay-Z as a tool to market to black people to get them to try to get their representatives to push this bill through into law because they think we're stupid. So we'll go and get nappy-headed Jay-Z, who's married to Beyonce. Whenever you put somebody black in front of them, they just follow them. I don't know where they've been. Okay, but Obama led to a lot of buyer's remorse for me, especially the way in which he condescended to black people. And I'm not just talking about at Morehouse's college graduation, when he told people at the National Urban League, and this was during his presidency, to take off their house shoes and put on their marching shoes as if they were like lazy on welfare, like wild shit. Yeah, look your boy up. Okay, so all this following black people just because they black, that's not my setup. So even when people say, oh, I'm rooting for everybody black, let me tell you something. I watch TV as a kid and stuff like that, and I'd root for the black person on Jeopardy. I'd root for the black person on Wheel of Fortune. I'd root for the black person, in some game show. I'm not rooting for everybody black. I'm not rooting for no goddamn Candace Owens. I'm not rooting for no corny ass millions making Michael Eric Dyson sitting up there rapping this shit because black people are just so stupid. Let me coon for them. Let me make monkey noises at them and they'll be down with it. Like, I'm not here for that bullshit. Jay-Z's pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This black capitalism. That shit was built on our oppression. And even you, nappy head ass Jay-Z, Sean Carter, get the fuck up out of here. And the way his dreads look, there's probably all kinds of spiders and worms eating at his brain. Anyway, you can't trust nobody that wear their hair like that and don't wash. Oh my gosh. I thought he was ugly before, but he is trying to prove to us he can be uglier. Anyway, there is no way he's not being paid to do this. But my thing is, all money is not good money. Like, how much more do you need? You don't need it, but you're greedy. Yeah, your kids can go to private school. And honestly, I'm not going to lie. To some degree, I have learned to understand why certain kids do need to be put in a private school. Particularly, like, if they come from a lot of wealth. And not necessarily wealth, but, like, if they're famous. The level of excuses made in private school. Oh, the kid is missing for 2 months. They're having a lot of psychological issues. We had to send them away. Or, they've been really sick. Like, we don't know. This girl had an abortion, but okay, this is the game we gonna play. Or their parents are shooting a movie abroad, so they'll be gone for 2 months, and y'all be sure to catch them up. Like, what the fuck? Meanwhile, you can get left behind for missing too many days in public school. You do realize that in independent schools, you don't have to take state tests. Whereas that can determine whether you even get promoted to the next grade or not in most states. But because you pay to go to private school, you essentially pay out of what is keeping other people from being able to progress. It's a fucked up system, y'all. Don't fall for that voucher shit. All right? The purpose of the census, among other things, is to find out how many people are in the country, county, city, within certain tax brackets, so they can, in theory, provide appropriate funds to fund the public schools. If you have $300 million to give to private schools for a quote-unquote better education, why the fuck not appropriate that same money to increase the pay for teachers to decrease the amount of money spent on creating these state tests by education consultants who aren't even in the classroom, and get rid of those shits. Because I will tell you, one of the benefits of being at a private school and not having to worry about end of year tests, my job doesn't hinge on that. I'm allowed to be far more creative than I would in a public school space because I don't have to teach to a test. I would much rather be giving that energy to African American children, Latinx children, who I can make a difference in. And that's why I do a lot of summer teaching and things like that in those kind of programs. But I had to make a living, and this is where I got a job. Like, it's really like the number of hoops you have to jump through as a black person in any of this is insanity. So anyway, the system isn't broken, y'all. It's working the way it's supposed to. This is their way of giving white private schools more money. And trust me, the black kids that get let into private schools, I can tell you right now, the majority of them, especially if they start in kindergarten and graduate in 12th grade, one of those same K through 12 private schools, they always end up having these mental breakdowns during their time or once they get to college. And guess what? Those white private schools don't give a fuck. They're not looking for you to come back as an alum. You served your purpose, existing as a black person. The black kids that get certain kinds of attention for not being what we thought black people were, I'm telling you, that takes a toll on your psyche. And there's also a preference for Africans, like not African Americans, and people from the Caribbean. And they count as racially black. And the level of resentment I have seen from African and Caribbean students from the time they're small, just having like the black American teacher, I don't give a damn about her having a PhD, being disrespectful, outwardly rude, their parents being, and that's why it's not just like, oh, just kid behavior to me. Because this is really about the training in the thinking. And white people prefer that. There's a preference for it. I've seen it. I'm just telling you, that's the way it's working. And then those people either go to other countries or they readily accept the theory that, oh, we're different, we're better. So for white people, that helps perpetuate the idea of white supremacy. Just like I told you, in order for private schools to exist and to be something great, they need public schools to be poor and underfunded, right? In order for white supremacy to exist, it has essentially needed black lives. They didn't murder us all like they did the indigenous peoples. They kidnapped us. And some of us, many of us survived, many of us didn't. But the end goal, and that's what you call ethnocide, whereas what happened to the indigenous people was genocide. Because what they did was they extracted the work and destroyed black people's culture to be able to control them. And they're still fucking doing it. These kids in private school get all these lessons, get to have music and bands, and they ain't even got no fucking talent. So, like I said, this is where I got a steady job. Somebody's gonna be like, well, why was you doing that? Because I got to pay my bills. But if I was like most of the people who work at these private schools, who might as well be getting welfare, because they're just exist, they don't work nearly as hard as I do. Their students don't go through the rigmarole that I do, because I came in public school. I'm like, y'all gotta prove yourself. But this is the shit I'm talking about. But once again, our society values money over everything. They value money over character, over integrity, over intelligence. So as long as you can say someone makes a lot of money, it's also synonymous in your head with they're smart. And therefore, if they're smart, you should listen to whatever they say so you can have that life. Instead of people realizing that if you've become a billionaire, you've often become that one from not being a good person at all. You've usually paid off congressional leaders to pass laws that would deregulate the economy, okay, and allow them to scam people and scam hardworking Americans through housing loans, student loans, who they've already sold the dream of, if you work hard enough, you can live well too. When they are actively creating and maintaining a system that makes living well impossible. We live in a 3-card Monty government. And sometimes the best way to deal with a con and a con artist is not to engage with it at all. I don't mean don't fight the bill. I'm saying I don't know who's rocking with Jay-Z nowadays like that. But I know millennials and the people that may have grown up on him, some of them may still fuck with it. I never saw what the big deal was about him. I really didn't. I thought he was ugly as fuck. He had some bops, Hard Knocks, Big Pimpin', which now, of course, as a black feminist, I find problematic. But the beat and stuff is high. I can't take that away. And once again, Jay-Z is a black billionaire. So the thinking across America, not just black people, but the thinking across America is, if you have money and lots of it, you know what you're talking about. Everybody should listen to you. But it's far more detrimental to African Americans than it is for other groups when we believe that, and then when we act according to it by supporting bills for vouchers. They did the same thing in Louisiana during the Bush era. They voted for him, believing they could do that. And what the fuck did they get? Fucking Katrina. Bush sitting on his fucking ass while black people die on live fucking TV. He didn't give a shit. And a 2008 economy crash, a war in Iraq, and those kids were still undereducated. So all I'm saying is don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. All right. See y'all soon. I finished my last faculty meeting today. I'm done. Bye.